Today, in our Minded Chat, we will discuss about the overall approach to innovation and open innovation that is run by Shell. And specifically, I have the pleasure to have with me today Geert van der Wouw, that is the Vice President of Shell Ventures. Hi, Geert.
Hi, Alberto. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And let's start with congratulations, because I think congratulations are in order. As you know, Shell has been recognized also this year among the corporate startup stars. So congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you for bestowing that honorable award upon us. So I appreciate it.
Okay, cool. So Geert, the goal of our conversation today is to deep dive into Shell and then later into Shell Ventures. That is the part of the company that you lead. And so, but let's start to move one step back. And I would like you to ask you if you can provide us with a brief overview of Shell. I think everybody knows Shell, and specifically the overall organization regarding innovation, obviously, of Shell.
Yeah, so besides, say, corporate R&D, which is still a large portion of research and innovation that we do at Shell, we have several innovation tools in Shell, primarily focused on reaching out and engaging and collaborating with universities, university startups, with entrepreneurs and startups, but also with our suppliers and vendors. Yeah, and so. In that sense, across the whole value chain of, say, early stage fundamental technology research, collaborating with universities, to earlier stage startups and late stage startups, we have different tools in our innovation toolbox to engage with external innovators. And considerable portion of our overall spend in R&D and tech development is increasingly spent with external innovators, as we realize that when Shell is as a leader in the energy transition, moving into all kind of new territories and domains, there is simply too much to conquer, and we need to rely increasingly on, for example, innovations that are happening through startups.
That's just a quick question that I think is a super hot topic, is the relationship between R&D and innovation. As you know, many oil and gas company has decided to put R&D together with innovation, and some of them also ICT. What's the Shell approach here?
It's a bit mixed. So my organization, Shell Ventures, is actually not part of R&D. It's part of our new energies business. But we provide venturing to the broader Royal Dutch Shell group. So we invest in technologies from upstream oil and gas to the new energies domain, renewable power and heat, to new forms of mobility. But we're independent from R&D, recognizing that what we do is of course slightly different from developing proprietary intellectual property through large corporate R&D programs.
Got it perfectly. So going back, I don't know if you can have the image with the framework that we typically use, just to help us and also help our audience to navigate it through. This is the framework we typically use to try to identify the potential different tools that corporates use dealing with startups and dealing with innovation. Obviously, R&D is separate; it's a separate field, but it's becoming more and more part of this equation. As you can see, there is different modes that corporates typically use. Not all of them have to use them all, but some of them use plenty of them. Can you help us just at high level to navigate through what Shell is using, what is doing, from the accelerators, venture builder, up to venture client? CVC is definitely your own turf and acquisitions.
Yeah, I mean, starting from the left, if you can keep the picture up, because that helps me to explain how we operate, Alberto, thank you. So starting from the left, I mean, we have a dedicated group that looks at university collaborations. And so we have, deep relationships on technology collaboration with top 50 universities, tech universities in the world, and we have ongoing programs with all of them. We also, as Shell Ventures, invest in early stage VC funds as a way to really get some eyes and ears on say that pre-series A, Series A investment domain, and see what is emerging in terms of potential disruption in the market and who's investing and what and why. So we are a limited partner in several VC funds as a way for us also to create some early eyes and ears and create deal flow. On the intrapreneur and innovation lab side, we have regularly spun out startups from Shell, and Shell Ventures has been kind of the instrument used for that, as we know how to structure these kind of deals. So we have a couple of very successful companies currently in the portfolio that were originally founded in Shell and were then spun out. We believe that that is a good, the spin out model is a good model to really test whether the idea is actually, good enough to attract external funding. In that sense, it's a good litmus test. Yeah. So, for example, we have a company called Cumulus that is developing all kind of digital ways to facilitate the operations and maintenance process, and they have a smart torque system that helps us with creating a full overview of nuts and bolts in a petrochemical site or any site for that matter, and really prevent leakages. And the technology was developed in Shell. We then spin it out. We find external investors to co-invest with us, and we dilute to a minority share. We've done a similar investment in a company we spun out from Shell that does external scanning of the carrossery, the outside of cars, to see whether there's dents and scratches and on the car, and which is used in fleet management, for example. So those are two examples of companies we spun out from Shell.
This last company?
It's Raven AI. It's a company we spun out, and it's now based in Israel. And we got 2 external investors on board, and actually the company is doing very well. So it's a really cool company. And then, of course, we have 2 programs to reach out to startup entrepreneurs. An early stage program, which we call Game Changer, which, like Shell Ventures, has been in the market since 1990. Well, Game Changer is even a little older. I think it's 1995. Shell Ventures started in 1997. So we're one of the oldest, corporate venture units, certainly in energy. And Game Changer, what they do is they will do proof of concept type things with early stage entrepreneurs to really, trial and test technology through a joint development agreement, and see whether it works. Whether we can get to an alpha or beta prototype. And then Shell Ventures follows suit if the investment or if the technology is interesting enough and we think it can create material value at scale, then we may invest as Shell Ventures. Typically, we invest at a Series A, B, C level. We have done pre-Series A as well. And then, of course, at the very end of the spectrum, there's acquisitions. So, for example, in 2019, Shell New Energies bought a company from our portfolio called Sonnenbatterie at the time. Is a originally German company that is a leader in the energy solar storage business. And so that's an example where Shell Ventures served as an early outpost to really look at, is this a business model and a technology that we feel as Shell we should play a role in. And
so
then,
you invested first and acquisition come later.
Yeah, and then later Shell bought the whole company from us and the other VCs. And of course, at that point we have to
exit, yes.
we have to step out, and because we want to manage that conflict of interest type situation very carefully. Yeah.
But there are also multiple examples of acquisition of company that are not your portfolio company, I suppose.
True. I mean, if you look at New Energies, I think we've done something like 10 investments in the last 3 years of startups. And often these startups came in originally through us, and then instead of doing a minority investment through Shell Ventures, we as Shell decided to buy the full company. This happened several times. So a lot of the acquisition targets we've got in New Energies used to be startups, were founded within the last 10, 12 years. So startups increasingly play an important role as targets for companies like ourselves that want to lead in the energy transition.
And going back to the framework before, in terms of accelerators, venture builders, I know that you have E4, you have
Yeah,
Shell X. Can you
yeah.
give us shed some light on
Yeah,
this?
so E4 is, and we have a couple of these incubation type things as well. E4 is one of those platforms that we started in India to actually start connecting with the startup ecosystem, particularly in the digital domain in India. And we have several of these, say called more local or national initiatives across the globe to create more early stage interaction between Shell's R&D and technology portfolio and the startup community.
Got it. Cool. Let's go to the main topic of our discussion, that is Shell Venture. Again, we already briefly touched, because it looks like that really Shell Venture is the minimum common denominator of most of the activity that run over here across the spectrum. So can you give us a bit of the history of Shell Ventures, sizing in terms of what is the size of the fund, the kind of the fund, what is your quite unique approach?
Yeah, today we have 90 companies in our portfolios, active companies in our portfolio, which is a portfolio of several hundred million. We don't disclose the exact amount, but it's a sizable portfolio across all continents. So we invest in from say renewable power and heat to new forms of mobility, connected cars, autonomy, electric mobility, but also new fuels, hydrogen to biofuel, second generation. We invest a lot in things that help optimize the grid and also the interface between electric mobility and the home. So the smart home arena as well. We have invested in some of the generation equipment, but not a lot. We don't think it's necessarily a very venturable game. But for example, in second generation biofuels, we help the business to at least get an early seat on some of the most promising second generation biofuels developments. And so we may take a small share in some of these more traditional clean tech companies, but really with the view of, okay, that's not necessarily an investment that will reap a huge return, but it's a strategic position of Shell to create access to the molecule at a later stage. And then we continue to invest in some of the oil and gas domains as well, particularly where it pertains reducing cost, maximizing the value from existing assets, deep water, and particularly where it involves digital as a way to optimize our assets and our projects. So those are in broad terms where we invest. We are represented in 7 locations globally. So we're one of those rare VCs and corporate VCs that really have a global presence, in San Francisco, in Boston, in Houston, Netherlands, London, India, and China. And with a view that we will probably grow in Asia more than in the rest of the world if we continue to grow and prosper. How
many people is the overall team?
It's about 35 people. So each hub is about, I'd say 4 or 5 people. And from there, we located there strategically because those are the most active startup domains.
Yes.
And Israel, we would cover from either the Netherlands or the UK, which can be done quite effectively, or Germany for that matter. But that's where most of the activity is taking place also from an energy perspective. So every investment we do has to do with energy in the end of the day. I think what is unique about our approach, and we pride ourselves to be better at that than most of our colleagues in this industry is the way we go about implementation management. And we have a deployment management team under the leadership of Michiel van Haarsma-Buma. And what they do is they continuously bring the startups that we have invested in touch and broker connections and also contracts with the assets and the projects in the Shell organization. And so I can proudly say that almost every investment we've done so far, we are deploying somewhere in Shell And of course, that creates a lot of value to the entrepreneur, makes us an attractive co-investor to entrepreneurs and VCs alike, because we really can prove that we help grow these companies. And so I think that's probably the most differentiating proposition, or part of our proposition is the fact that we really have become very good at the implementation management piece.
Yeah, again, this model is something that I think everybody recognizes you as one of the early movers to decide there was something to needed to bridge the CVC, and particularly the CVC portfolio with the parent company. Because again, one of the discussing about was the competitive advantages of CVC versus a normal VC. The real advantage is that you should have a fast track or privileged access to the parent company and the business lines and the potential to exploit the assets of the parent company. And this is most of the time is true, but most of the time it's true on the paper, and less is true in reality. And the fact that you guys recognize that there was something to be bridged to make the two-part work is something that I think everybody recognizes, and by the way has been followed by other CVC that now use a similar model. They call them partnership director or whatever you want. But again, this model, I think the fact that you have identified a real gap and you find probably the right model to close it, I think is the testimony that what you've done and was quite forward-looking, is the fact that many other CVC are following suit and replicating your model.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that, Alberto. It's still developing. Hey, we learn every day from the approach, and trying to bring it to the next level of value creation. And there's no silver bullets there. There's not one size fits all kind of approach here. It's really a function of the amount of effort you put in, the quality of the people that sit in my implementation management team, and also people often forget that. We often think as the entrepreneurs as being the innovators, and that's true. But the folks in Shell that help integrate the innovation into a more integrated value proposition that we can then sell to our customers, or we can use in our assets, are equally innovators. I mean, there's different classes of innovators in my view. You've got the innovators that develop the technology, and often that is in the energy domain a bit of a point solution, which is the right way to go about it, because you as a startup you need to be very focused to develop one product and service in an environment of scarcity. But then you need folks that actually bridge the gap with the users of the technology, and the users of the technology need to have systems thinking capabilities to really see how we can integrate that technology or business model into a wider business proposition. And equally, they are innovators in my mind. So innovation is it takes more than two to tango.
Yes, and you say something that I was writing it down because I think it's probably will be the quote out of this interview. You need people that bridge the gap with the use of the technology. And this is particularly true if we're talking about deploying technology in large and complex organizations.
Yeah.
And again, theoretically is easy, practically is a nightmare, because again, there is the legacy, then there is the complexity of working with multiple units, multiple people, reaching potentially large market, but still to get there is not a walk in the park. And so the ability to narrow down, to reduce these barriers is something that most of the time is simply underestimated. And the fact that you identify a team that is focused just on doing that. And by the way, is when I look at your model, the model in the VC world that's probably is the closest is the one, the Andreessen and Horowitz. I think the first one, they decided that in order to be better investor, they need to invest their own resources to help the portfolio companies. And so they added a layer of services to support the portfolio company. What you have done is you put in the P&L of the venture unit people to help your portfolio company to make business with your parent.
Yeah,
And if you look from outside, maybe why are you sustaining the cost for doing business development for your portfolio company that you already invested into? And that is the typical question. Right? It makes a lot of sense, but probably it makes sense to elaborate a bit more over here.
Yeah, no, I mean you gotta think. I mean the solution is a multi-pronged solution. On one side, you got as a big corporate, you got to make it easier to onboard and contract with smaller suppliers like startups and create a slimmed down standard contract for these SMEs. Recognize their limited capacity to absorb contractual risk, right? On the other side, you gotta look at, okay, how do we integrate their point solution into a broader proposition and look at the full system. And that means that you also need to think about how do we make sure that the startup works together with the integrator contractors that we have. So we Shell and the energy industry, we work a lot with engineer construction firms, offshore installation contractors, whether it's in wind or in oil and gas. But the engineering contractors when we construct a hydrogen plant or a biofuels plant. And so how does that innovation integrate with their wider proposition? And it's really important to consider that. Now, of course, you need to be quite good at forecasting demand for the technology and the innovation. You need to be able to show scale in order to be material and significant. You need to reach scale in energy. It is what it is. It is an industry that touches our lives at so many levels that in order to be material, you just need to reach scale, and that is something that as Shell, and generally energy companies know how to do really well, is how to scale stuff. And then you need to create clarity on the mandates in that deployment process. Sometimes corporates have a tendency to have too many people involved in the innovation initiative. Many people can say no to it, but there's only one person that can approve. So as a corporate, you also need to really rethink the way you innovate yourself. And think about how do we manage those firsts. In energy, often, the VCs and the corporate VCs bring a technology to a certain level, and then they hit a big brick wall when the first commercial pilot needs to be built, and we need to invest 20 or 100 million into this pilot. The VCs have tapped out. They need to raise a new fund that they want to force an exit. Therefore, the corporates are the only deep pockets still around, and it's still too early for institutional and private investors, private equity investors, to come in because there's still too much tech risk. And this is the classical problem that we see in energy venturing. And so that's an area where we're particularly putting a lot of focus in upfront to think, okay, what is it? How are we going to bridge that gap when the time comes? Because it is a classical valley of death to most energy startups.
Yes, I think it's very interesting. I have a two additional question. One is very practical. Is talking about your implementation managers, how is the optimal ratio, optimal for what you have seen thus far in terms of one implementation manager, how many portfolio company can effectively follow and support? How many? 3, 4, 5? What's the typical ratio?
Oh, probably more than that. Yeah, I mean, we have a team of 4 or 5 people in implementation management, and we have 90 portfolio companies now. Not all of those portfolio companies are super active, and some of them have matured to a level where the original implementation management effort is not needed so much anymore because they have become more established as a supplier to Shell, and then the business takes over. But it's that intermediate period where we have to put our efforts in. So yeah, our implementation managers continue to be very busy, but yeah.
You keep them busy. Second question, I was discussing with Ingo Ramazol, Robert Bosch Venture Capital, about a similar topic. And you know that in Bosch there is a similar model, it's called Openbosch. Mm-hmm. The slightly different with your model, at least from my perspective, is that you technically have a more, what this might be defined as sort of push principle, meaning you are servicing your portfolio company in order to help them working with your parent. In Robert Bosch Venture Capital, the Openbosch unit, beyond the push principle, they also use the pool principle. They also try to identify potential needs from the business unit, from the parent company. And for them, they sought actors as potentially do some tech scouting. And not necessarily the relationship is limited to the portfolio company. Might also identify some other potential targets that are not good for investments, but are good for starting a POC with the parent company. So how much inside Shell Ventures, and specifically your implementation manager, are following the push or the pull principle, assuming that you can draw a line in the sand?
Yeah. No, it's always hard to draw a very strong line in the sand, but it's an important question, right? Because we also do the same thing with our businesses. We often invest in things where the business is super intrigued and fascinated in the technology and sees an immediate deployment opportunity. And sometimes we don't even need to do an investment. We just broker the connection and off we go. And you have to balance that with longer term, more disruptive plays, right? Because if you go to a business, and I've been in a business, I worked for a business, and you ask them what kind of innovation they need, they'll tell you what they need today or tomorrow. But it's not their it's not in their interest to look ahead. Well, it is in their interest, but they use us to really take a further look into the future. And so it's really important that you kind of iterate that shopping list that the business will give you, which is shorter term, more adjacent innovation, and you iterate that into the future to say, well, if I compare where the business wants to go strategically, and I look at the venture market, then, for example, autonomous driving is going to have a rather disruptive impact on our retail business. So now, whilst the retail people will not tell me to invest in autonomy, it is important that I do, because 5 years from now or 10 years from now, this will bite them in the butt, right? So we need to kind of balance the short-term adjacent innovations with the long-term, potentially more disruptive plays. And I'd say it's about 50-50. It can be 60-40, whatever, but you kind of need to have a mental balance there, and make sure that you have some of these innovations that are a bit out there, where the business, when we invest in those things, they may be smiling at us, but they don't immediately have a deployment opportunity. And meanwhile, work with the business to invest in things that are really relevant today or tomorrow to them.
So this is, again, you touch one of the big topic that any CVC typically has, that is balancing horizon. H1, H2, H3. How do you do that?
Yeah.
And this was one of the questions that I have. So it's a difficult call. Looking at your portfolio overall, because now, again, you are one of the CVC probably with the longest tradition. And so probably also your portfolio has also statistical value, because it's large enough to start doing some analysis. How much is the breakdown between Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3? Again,
well, I guess
figures is
it's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's shifting a little bit, Alberto. So when we restarted Shell Ventures again in 2012, after we spun it out in 2007 and sold a large minority share as a secondary to a private equity firm, and so we restarted Shell Ventures as a Shell managed, Shell funded unit again in 2012, and I was at the start of that together with my then CFO, who's still with us, by the way. He's my chief investment officer today. But we were primarily investing in oil and gas and digital domains, right? New energies was still later in the future. So the oil and gas industry to us was quite predictable in a way, from an innovation perspective, if I'm deadly honest, right? So we could afford not to go too far in the future and actually invest more into adjacencies and create value from deployment, rather than from exits, or from things that could be very disruptive. In 5 years' time, we could afford to wait in that sense. But with us entering as a leader in the energy transition, entering into new domains like hydrogen and second generation biofuels and battery storage and smart homes and electric mobility and solar and wind, we suddenly had to branch out to a lot of tech domains where we had less visibility, and also we had less predictable capacity than we used to have in oil and gas. And so venturing became a tool now also to invest in the longer term, say more Horizon 3 type technologies where, yeah, it is sometimes a bit spray and pray, huh? Where you will invest in things that will not work out. Yeah. But because you cannot predict the future, but you have a thesis in terms of where you think it might be going, and then you try to across the value chain do venture investments to kind of test that thesis. And so venturing is then more used strategically as for Shell to really help Shell get insights in terms of the pathway that the energy industry will take going forward.
That triggers, again, I will spend a full day talking with you, but we need to go down to the close our conversation. But I have still some regular question to ask you is, and again, one is just three of what you just say. So I'm putting on the table another $1 billion question that is, how much strategic, how much financial should be the approach of the CVC? I know that's...
Yeah. I get the question a lot, and I always say it's both, and it has to be both. I mean, if we are just purely strategic and we don't care about an exit, well, we will lose our reputation very quickly. Yeah, as a preferred co-investment partner to the VCs and also to the other corporate VCs. So it's a matter of branding and recognition and credibility that you're very focused on maximizing exit returns. In order to get access to the right deal flow, in order to be a credible and preferred co-investment partner, this is essential. And of course, if I make if I do a $10 million investment, and even if I make a 10x return on it, honestly, nobody in Shell will wake up, right? But if with that same investment, I can create $100 million NPV by optimizing an offshore asset in say the Gulf of Mexico and Brazil, or by helping the new energies business create a new business growth opportunity in the consumer power, the power retail market, then of course that's where the real value to Shell is. Yeah, but you cannot do one without the other. You have to be focused on investing in great companies that are driving towards an exit, in order for us to be, an effective, credible CVC unit.
Yeah. Just technical question that is, looking at your portfolio, how many exits did you get, broadly speaking?
Well, countless, I would say. So when we started investing again when we started Shell Ventures again in 2012, we started to invest in all earnesty in 2014, 15, and really ramped up in 16, 17. And so it's still an early portfolio. We've had a couple of exits, but in energy, the typical holding period for an energy venture it can be anywhere between 8 and 10 years. So it's still too early to call. If you look at the fair market value of our portfolio, which we obviously track, then it's looking very good. And then if you add to that the amount of value we create from deployment, then it's looking very good, I would say. So the energy domain is, with the exception of very, very few, is not a domain where you'll see a lot of unicorns, right? It's not like the digital domain where, consumer digital companies get sold for billions of dollars. In energy, is a different market with different dynamics. And so there's hardly any true, billion-dollar companies from an exit perspective in energy, and so in that sense, your expectations have to be a bit more modest. But I'm pleased with the performance of the portfolio today.
So just in terms of your KPIs for measuring the value beyond the tracking, obviously the return on investments, and also which is the market value of your portfolio, any other indicators that you use to track internally your performance?
No, absolutely. So it's exits, and we also make a fair market value assessment on our portfolio on a very regular basis. We track and trace deployment economics. So how much free cash flow have we helped generate in the company through deploying these technologies and business models inside Shell? We look at new business growth opportunities that we've helped create. We also look at insights. We now regularly organize insight sessions where we invite the wider Shell community to panel conversations where we have high caliber external guests and some people from Shell and Shell Ventures talk about domains that are highly relevant to Shell and the energy transition. So we recently did one on disruptive innovation and the trials and tribulations of investing in something like Tesla when you're an early investor, and so there was those are the kind of things that are actually really valuable, because again, Shell Ventures, and I think any corporate venture capital unit has a very important responsibility to be an early indicator of what's coming, and to have eyes and ears in an extremely relevant ecosystem of startup innovators for the energy transition. So bringing those insights in is really important, and it's really hard to measure as well. So that is a bit soft, but it's very important.
Yes, that's exactly the last question that I had is one of the value of having a CVC on board, particularly the one that are investing a bit more forward, H3 rather than H1, just supporting the day-to-day business, is that you provide insights. And so the question that I have is how do you, one of the things that is very difficult to measure and track is obviously you are providing strategic insights to your parent company, but how to measure these insights, how to measure the value of such insights. What is your experience? I think you just say that you organize regular sessions.
Yeah, that's one way of doing it. Another one is, say the business has an interest in company X and acquire company X, then we can bring alternatives to them and say, well, listen, I know you're quite excited about this company in, say, the UK, but there's actually several others that are doing similar things. And you may want to take a peek at them because maybe their management teams are stronger, or they have more traction with existing customers. There's sometimes a tendency, of course, with people in the business, but also in Shell Ventures, you need to be careful that you start to develop a bias towards one company. And so we can help create more diversity in the deal flow from that perspective. So that would be another example. Yeah. Or for example, we have started venturing in China. Now China is also clearly a very interesting market for our whole mobility business, whether it's in retail or lubricants or aviation. And so, by being part of the mobility and aviation ecosystem as a venture unit, you hear things and you see things that could be quite insightful to the business. So we then set up sessions with the business to share with them what we hear and see, and exchange also views, because there's certainly things that they like us to test in the market and come back again. So it's a good interaction with the business there, but it needs active management. You cannot rely on it to happen automatically.
Yes, I think the fact that nothing magically happens. That, by the way, is one of the best quote from Mikkel. Is probably the perfect way for closing our conversation. I think nothing magically happens, but if you put the right amount of work and of brain in behind what you do, typically you collect good results. And I think it's something that Shell Ventures has done and is continuing to do it. So I'm happy that we were able to recognize your effort, and really thank you for these valuable insights, Geert.
No, thank you again, Alberto, for bestowing the award upon us. We are honored and pleased to be part of your ecosystem. So thank you.